something that's recognizing fresh and different ways of thinking in academia is worth celebrating. So I was very pleased, obviously, when I was notified that I'm getting the award for this year. When you say about something that is controversial, you're not just talking about the thing that you're describing, you're talking about what the cultural standards are and how others are trained to think. So the fact that something is controversial says nothing intrinsic about its value or its essence. Basically, it describes that somebody communicated something in a context that is not quite ready to receive it. And that may be as much a comment on the context than it is on the matter at hand. That's how I see my work. I talk about the fact that the mind and the body can't be separated, and that emotions have a huge role to play in health and illness. Now that's controversial if you look at the curriculum of the average medical school, where they don't talk about that stuff at all. But if you look at the actual science, it's not even vaguely controversial. What keeps me motivated is very simple. I just love looking for the truth, which doesn't mean I'm always right, but I just want to know what's going on. What's the truth here? Whether that has to do with Middle Eastern politics or science or medicine, I just don't know the truth. Also with me, what's the truth here?
What a wonderful way to kick off this evening. I think that sort of opens us to what we are going to be enjoying and engaged in with Gabor in a few moments. But before we get to hear from Gabor, we have a bit more pomp and ceremony, and that is to be able to give Gabor the award. And so I would like to invite Gabor up, and also David. So on behalf of the Provost and the Sterling Prize Committee, David and I would like to present Dr. Gabor Maté with the 2024 Nora and Ted Sterling Prize in support of controversy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elias. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll put this here for now.
Sorry. And you have the stage.
Well, can you hear me okay? I hope you can. Thank you for this thank you to SFU and the committee for this honor with which you're presenting me tonight. Thank you all for coming. There's some personal connections here. I knew Ted and Nora Sterling. I've been to their home. And Elias, the son, actually reminded me that I used to be Ted's physician for a while, which I'd totally forgotten, I forget a lot. So thank you for that. And also with SFU, I'm a graduate of SFU. After my undergraduate degree in English and history, I was in the education department, graduating from there, and I taught high school for 3 years. Then, as I've often said, I decided that was way too stressful, so I became a doctor instead, and working in the downtown east side. A lot easier than dealing with teenagers, Just one statement before I actually begin my address. When I was an undergraduate at UBC in mid to late 1960s, and then at SFU in the PDP, the education program, and then back at UBC in medicine, there was a terrible war going on. A very powerful country was bombing, burning, destroying a country far away. Millions of people died. People burned alive. Carpet bombing. And the press and the media lied about it. They didn't tell the truth. There's a terrible war going on right now with some similar features, except in this case, the victims have no capacity to fight back. 50,000 people have died, 70% of them women and children. In Canadian terms, that would mean 1 million people dying in an area as big as the West End and Stanley Park. And the press is not telling you the truth about it. So the prize money that I'm being awarded is going to go to medical aid in Gaza, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you. Thank you. So this is a pricing controversy. Words are interesting. Universe, university means turning as one. Controversy means turning against, turning in the other direction. And universities are supposed to foster controversy, which often they don't. Noam Chomsky once talked about intellectuals as a herd of independent minds. And as my family, some of whom are here tonight, can well tell you, nobody's ever accused me of not being arrogant. And so as far as I'm concerned, the only controversy here is why I didn't get this prize a long time ago. And if that seems impudent to you, I think impudence is necessary. I'm reading a biography of Albert Einstein right now, and he said, "Long live impudence. It's my guardian angel in this world." And he also said that blind respect for authority is the greatest enemy of the truth. And he also said that mistrust of any kind of authority, a skeptical approach to the convictions which were current in whatever social environment I found myself in, that's an attitude that never left me. When he was in high school, a classroom, a homeroom teacher told him that he'll never amount to anything, not for lack of intelligence, but because of his contrariness. And Einstein pleaded, "Look, I have not committed any offense." And the teacher said, your very presence in this classroom undermines the class's respect for me." Well, I'm not claiming any kind of intellectual parity here, but characterologically, that's, yeah. When I was in grade 6 in Hungary, the teacher sent home a note home to my parents saying that he better watch it because he agitates his classmates. And I think you have to have some certain degree of impudence if you're going to be intelligently controversial. In other words, you have to have some confidence that what you see is the truth and that what you've learned is worth presenting. And again, going back to Einstein, he said that the right to search for the truth also implies a duty. One must not conceal any part of what one has recognized to be true. I used to have a patient who was a very well-known Canadian poet, and his name was Warren. Um, he was a prof at UBC. And Warren would come to my office, and I'd deal with the medical affairs, but we'd always chat as well. And I said to Warren once, "Listen, Warren, I want to write, but I don't know what." And he said, "Gabor," he said, "you're going to write when you have something to teach the world." And that's what happened. As I began to see things and to see them in a different light than they had been presented to me, I really had this urge to say those things and to write about them and to speak about them. And I couldn't much care how my colleagues or the profession in which I was trained or academia would receive that. And as a matter of fact, it was even a good I mean, I thought about being an academic, but something in me said no. And because I realized retrospectively that, and even then I saw that it would just put me in a kind of straitjacket where it would be difficult to come to my own conclusions and to present them. And part of what that is about in medicine is that everything has to be double blind and you have to prove everything and all these tests and studies and research and so on. It's not how I've learned. I mean, I was trained scientifically in medicine, but mostly I learned by watching my patients and hearing their stories. and seeing the patterns and seeing the connections. And at that time, I didn't know, because nobody told me, that there was actually a lot of research, scientific research. People had done the work, and they'd come to very similar conclusions. So it's like many people in the medical profession, they had kind of to discover it for themselves, and then they look around and say, "Oh my God, there's all this research proving what I saw myself." Shouldn't it be the other way around? Maybe they should tell you about these things before you graduate. And the things that I should tell you about, I'll be talking to you about. But there's a benefit not to be in academia. And again, I go back to Einstein. I'm just having to reading his biography, so I love a lot of the things that he said. And he when he discovered when he wrote in 1905, he wrote four groundbreaking papers on physics that completely upended the way the world had been understood until then. And he wasn't an academic. He wasn't even a doctor yet. He wasn't even a doctorate in physics yet. He was working as an official at the patent office in Bern, Switzerland. And that may have been seen to by some people as a disadvantage, but he actually said that there's an advantage to not having to write academic papers, which is a temptation to superficiality, which only the strong can resist. And certainly, if the things that I found um, had to be proven in academic papers, I then I would have published maybe 20, 30 obscure papers that would have appeared in medical journals, and nobody would read them or apply them. So it was my fortune not to be caught in that world. And when I did speak, it was to the public. And what is it that I found? So there's a great Canadian stress researcher. In fact, he's the one who coined the word stress in the way that we use it today. And a lot of my work has been in the connection between emotional stress and physiological health, all based on early experience. And this man's name was Janos Selye, or Hans Selye, as he was known in Canada. He was a fellow Hungarian, and he worked at the University of Montreal. And he's the one that showed in the laboratory that when you stress animals, it affects their adrenal gland, it ulcerates their intestines, and it suppresses their immune system. And Selye said that it is not to see something first, but to establish solid connections between the previously known and the hitherto unknown that constitutes the essence of scientific discovery. It is the process of tying together which best promotes true understanding and real progress. And again, what I saw in family practice, and I saw on the downtown east side, and I saw in palliative care, is that the mind and the body can't be separated, that what happens emotionally, psychically, has an impact physiologically, and of course, vice versa. That you can't separate people's early experience from the rest of their lives. Now, there was a study, and this is what drives you crazy, because these studies keep coming in, like almost every week, a new study lands in my computer showing the mind-body unity. And the most recent one, maybe I received it 2 days ago, was a study that was published in 2022, 2 years ago, which showed that childhood trauma, childhood adversity predicts the severity of perimenopausal symptoms 4, 5, or 6 decades later. So the more adversity, um, traumatic events, you might say, a woman endured as a child, the greater her risk for severe perimenopausal symptoms. No, nothing about that surprised me. In fact, it's just the kind of thing that would be totally predictable. But when I'm saying that this is what the frustrating part, if you choose to be frustrated, is that this science is presented over and over and over and over again, tens of thousands of studies, and then not taught in the medical schools. So that there's a huge gap between science and practice, which is really a shame, because if we actually draw the lessons of the science that already exists, we could do so much more for the populations that we serve. Now, the other interesting thing about this is that there's nothing actually new about it, because this stuff has been noticed for centuries, centuries. So there was a very famous 18th century Scottish surgeon and researcher, John Hunter, and there's an institute in Glasgow named after him. And Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the great Romantic poet, exalted Hunter's profound ideas, and he said that um, Hunter's research spoke the language of God himself, as uttered by nature. Now, Hunter was a very irascible, mm, easily embittered and enraged human being, and he knew that this wasn't good for his heart. He was quite aware of this, and he actually said that, one of his assistants said that he was warm and impatient, readily provoked, and when irritated, not easily soothed. Typical type A personality. And Hunter himself said he feared that my life is in the hands of any rascal who chooses to annoy and tease me. And that's how he died. He got into an argument about admissions to the medical school. He had a heart attack and he died. I mean, he knew. Um, that wasn't new, and Darwin, Charles Darwin, knew the connection between the brain and mind and the heart. He said, when the mind is strongly excited, we might expect it would instantly affect in a direct manner the heart. And when the heart is affected, it reacts on the brain. And the state of the brain, um, again, reacts through the vagus nerve. He called it something else, was the vagus nerve on the heart, so that in any excitement, there'll be much mutual action and reaction between these two, the two most important organs in the body. He said this in 1872. You go to a cardiologist today, they're not going to talk to you about stresses and traumas for the most part, despite all the research. And this research, of course, was beautifully expressed by Elvis Presley, the great cardiologist, who said, every time I kiss your sweet lips, I can feel my heart go flip, flip. Talking about the mind-body unity. Um, I'll just give you a few examples, and just a few random examples. A study 5 years ago, the greater the degree of symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder a woman has, the higher the risk of ovarian cancer. And the milder the symptoms, the milder the risk. Mind-body connection. Um, Adults, parents who lose an adult child in war or accident, they've increased risk of leukemia. Parents who lose a child have double the risk of multiple sclerosis. Racism increases the risk of asthma and autoimmune disease. Uh, an indigenous woman in Canada has 6 times the rate of rheumatoid arthritis than a non-indigenous male. And I could go into the physiology and the psychology. I'm not going to. I'm just giving you the obvious examples here. 2 years ago, there was this breathless New York Times article. Oh, somebody showed a relationship between emotional factors and breast cancer. Really? Galen, the Roman physician in the second century, said the same thing. And in 1870, James Paget, who was a leading breast surgeon in Britain, and as a matter of fact, his name is still remembered in, this Paget's disease. He said that the connection between emotional states and breast cancer is too apparent not to be noticed. And then there's an article 2 years ago that presents this as new information. So it just, and I could go through so many other examples. Um, my first article on mind-body unity was a tentative piece in the Global Mail in the mid-90s when I wrote a weekly medical column for that publication. And I suggested that somebody's rheumatoid arthritis or actually some other autoimmune disease um, could be due to emotional stress. The Global Mail received a very angry letter from a rheumatologist at St. Paul's Hospital saying that, this is speculation, there's no truth to it. Well, there was, more than I even realized, but the rheumatologist didn't know that. And then the next time, the paper should ask a specialist to give an opinion, not a GP. Which kind of reminded me of the Wizard of Oz, because at the end of the film, if you remember, it's the Scarecrow, I think, that keeps looking for a brain. If I only had a brain. And at the end, when the wizard is unmasked, and anyway, the wizard says to the Scarecrow, you've been looking for a brain, but there's a lot of people out there who are writing academic papers, and they're professors and intellectuals and experts who have no more brains than you do. But what they do have is a diploma, he says. So he says, you don't need a brain, you need a diploma. Now, what's interesting is that the same rheumatologist, bless her soul, 7 or 8 years later, contacted me and said, you know what, you were right. I see the connection now between repressed emotions and autoimmune disease. I will not be going to that lecture tonight or what the connection is. I'm just saying there's a connection. But I can tell you another story. Another rheumatologist from Los Angeles works at UCLA, and she came up to me at a conference in California, and she said, I read your book When the Body Says No. I can see this connection between emotional factors, trauma, emotional repression, and rheumatoid disease. And since I read your book, I changed my practice. And I started talking to people about their stresses and their traumas. And you know what? I'm getting these great results. They have to be on less medication, or sometimes no medication. And I said, great. Can I interview you for my next book, which is going to be The Myth of Normal? That was published 2 years ago now. He says, yes, you can, but you can't use my name because my colleagues would come after me if I revealed that I was practicing that way. When I was writing that book, When the Body Says No, which is about, I was writing it 24 years ago now, I went to the cancer agency and to the psychology department. And I said, I'm working on this book, relationship between stress and illness, physiology and the psyche. And I'm looking for information on the relationship of stress and the onset of cancer. And the head of the psychology department said, well, we don't believe in that hypothesis. So I went to that library where I found hundreds of articles on the relationship of emotional factors and cancer. And some of the members of the department came up to me privately and said, we see that connection all the time. We're just not allowed to talk about it. This is the BC Cancer Agency little over 20 years ago. I don't know. I haven't caught up. I don't want to make assumptions. Maybe it has changed, but I'm really not clear that it has. And again, I'm talking about this gap between science and practice. And so the question I'm really asking is, why is any of this controversial? I mean, in 2012, there was an article from Harvard University published in the journal. By the way, could somebody give me a sense of the time? Because I've totally forgotten when I started talking. How much time have been talking? Anybody, Anita? Because I want to keep it to a certain. Sorry, I've been talking about 20 minutes. Okay, great. Thank you. Um, okay, that gives me a guideline. Um, this article came out in the Journal of Pediatrics, which is the official journal of the American Pediatric Academy. I mean, it's the Organization of American Pediatricians. The article's from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. You couldn't get more prestigious. And the article summed up decades of brain research where they showed that the brain is a historical organ, it's a social organ, it develops in interaction through the action of the environment and experiences on the genes, and that emotional relationships with a child were some of the most profound influences on the very physiology of the brain, which brain chemicals will be present and which will not. The implication of this, which is, for example, is that here in the downtown east side, where people are looking for opiates, heroin, and terribly enough, fentanyl, which is very dangerous. I mean, so is heroin, of course, and all the other opiates. They're actually missing the natural opiates that are meant to be there, that give us a sense of pain relief, that are essential for a sense of pleasure and reward, and which give us a sense of love and being and belonging and connection. And if their brains are missing those chemicals, it's not because genetically they're disadvantaged, but because the early environment was so traumatic that these circuits didn't develop the way they ought to have. So this article points out all the research that had been done for decades now. This is 2012. By then, on brain development and the influence of social and personal factors on and emotional factors on the physiology of the brain. 2012, February, that article came out. That month, I was scheduled to give um, grand rounds at Calgary Children's Hospital just before, just after this article came out. And I said, oh, great. My job has just become a lot easier. I don't have to pull out all the research that I collected on the very same subject. Here's it's collated and presented very articulately and very eloquently in this article from Harvard in your journal. And these pediatricians and residents and psychiatrists, they listened for an hour, and there was complete silence at the end, which is not only my experience. I mean, if it was me, if it was only me, I think it was maybe it's personal to me, but other colleagues of mine who, very well-known colleagues of mine, internationally known colleagues of mine, who work in, people who have become my colleagues and friends, who work in the same field, they said that was also their usual experience. It's changing now a bit, but they talk to medical audiences and it'd be utter silence. And finally, somebody put their hand up and they said, well, if this is all true, what can we do? Which is the wrong question. The right question is this true? Is this true? Because once you realize the truth of it, then what to do about it emerges. But there was a resistance even to having it being absorbed. And I had a similar experience. I gave a talk at a conference in Banff, maybe 20 years ago now, again on this mind-body unity theme, where you can't separate emotions from the environment. And after the talk, there was lunch. And I'm sitting at this table with a number of people, eating and talking. There's a man there with a very severe expression on his face and wouldn't look at me the whole lunchtime. And as soon as he finished his food, he got up silently and walked away. And they said, who's that? They said, oh, he's the dean of the local medical school. So that what I'm saying is, I wish that what I had to say was more controversial. When I say controversial, I wish there was controversy. There isn't enough. And I'm not personalizing it because I'm far from the only one who presents information about the mind-body unity, about the impact of early trauma. Speaking of heart disease, Canadian studies showed that men sexually abused had triple the rate of heart disease, regardless of whether they smoked or drank. I mean, how much more proof do you need? So the genuine issue for me is, why is there not more controversy? There's no controversy in a lot of the medical world because they don't even talk about this stuff. So it's not that. No, there's an SF. There is apparently works in the works, the medical school being established at the Simon Fraser University. I'll be really curious to see whether this new institution will begin to incorporate some of this science in the education of physicians. Because I think I'd love to see more controversy. I'd love to see more discussion. I just don't think we have enough. Well, let me just consider. And so what I really have to say is that, which as I said in that little clip of that video, controversy has nothing to do with the validity or lack of it, accuracy or lack of it, with a particular point of view. It has to do with the context in which those principles are presented and received. For hundreds of years, at least since Newton times or even before, Newton's time or before, scientists assumed that there was something called ether, in which electromagnetic waves were propagated like waves in the water. So for waves in the ocean, there has to be water there. Without water, there are no waves. So that the same concept was held of electromagnetic waves, such as light. So it was thought that there was this substance or entity called ether, which is invisible, impalpable, like gossamer, like untouchable, but a very real entity through which light waves were propagated, like waves are propagated in water. And then Einstein comes along and he points out that, but I mean, he wasn't the first one, and everybody's work is always based on the work of other people. That's just the truth. Um, so people kept trying to prove the existence of ether, and nobody could find any ether. Nobody could find any proof that ether exists. And then finally Einstein comes along and says, well, the emperor has no clothes. There's no ether. It doesn't exist. And that light can travel not only as waves, but also as particles, which calls for some integrative thinking. It means you have to be able to hold sort of almost opposite ideas at the same time. And it all depends on who's looking at it and under what conditions, whether it's going to behave like a wave or particles. And so it's controversial. Something is controversial depending very much on the context, very much on the context. And again, the principles of mind-body unity, well, a Canadian psychiatrist, Norman Doidge, said it really well. He said that, if I can find it, he says that, give me a second here. Well, I'll stop. He said that modern medicine reduces everything to physiology, biology. It only sees only measurable biological variables. It leaves no room within its framework for the social, psychological, and behavioral dimensions of illness. So there's a dualism where we separate the mind from the body and we separate the individual from the environment. In truth, no such separation is possible. Um, Emotions and physiology are inseparable, which also means that a person's social environment and personal circumstances are inseparable from his psychology because our emotions are generated in relationship to other people. And the great trauma psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk said that we're taught to think of ourselves as separate entities, but he says we barely exist as individuals because we're so affected by the circumstances, the social circumstances, the emotional circumstances, the relationships, the context in which we exist. Why that should be controversial, I think, is the only controversy. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mate. So we're now moving into the question and answer period of the evening. And I just want to remind everybody of the community guidelines and question and answer protocols. Just a little bit of a repeat, which is to say, please ensure that you are respectful of everyone around you and listen intently and support people in the engagement in conversation with Gabor this evening. Please ensure that you don't assume anything about those who might be asking questions. Refer to people with the pronouns they prefer. Practice self-care in whatever manner you need to. If you need to get up, move, stretch, step out for a while, that's all fine. And be open with your mind and heart. And we're also looking forward to the questions that you have for Gabor. And what I will ask you to do is to raise your hands really clearly. In fact, you might need to wave your arms because I am sitting with bright lights in my eyes, and I'm going to try and discern people from the audience who wish to ask questions and to point the 4 volunteers who have mics in your direction. And the volunteers are on both sets of aisles in different places. So I will ask you to do that. We have a lot of people here, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people with questions, and we will not get through them all, but we'll do our best. And so
Jane, I just wonder, is there some technical, yeah, any reason we couldn't put the house lights on so we can see the audience? Yeah, thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. And it's still bright, so I will still ask you to wave your arms, but it's a lot better than it was. And so keeping your questions concise is very important because that allows us to hear your question, answers to come, and for other people to have the opportunity to ask questions. To kick off, I am going to open up with a question for Gabor.
Mhm.
And my question, lots of questions, and so where to start? But I think the question that I would like to hear you talk about is you speak of the frustration of the science, indeed, the centuries of evidence,
Yeah.
observational evidence, if not scientific evidence.
Yeah.
And the two are related, but in relationship to trauma, injury, and psychological and physiological well-being. At the same time, it does seem that there is more recognition, if not sufficient, for the understanding of trauma's impact. And so, where do you see the field of trauma-informed care heading in the next decade?
Well, there has been tremendous progress in public awareness and relatively minimal awareness in professional awareness. I don't think, I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'd be so happy to be enlightened. I don't think the average medical student at UBC receives a single lecture on emotional trauma and its long-term health impacts. It should be a course lasting a year at least, not a single lecture. I don't think so. On the other hand, there's much more public awareness, and I do think eventually it's going to penetrate. But look, there's a film called Wisdom of Trauma that was made about my work. I think it was presented or, aired 3 years ago now. And it's been seen by 15 million people around the world, screenings all over the world. I called a friend of mine, a classmate of mine at UBC, who is to do with continuing medical education. And I said, I think this film should be seen by the medical students. My friend and colleague, very lovely guy, saw the film and said, I don't see how this relates to our work. Oh my God. So again, I'm not personalizing it. This is just a general state of things. Um, so I think it's a slow process. I think that the public interest is way ahead of the professional practice. And, you mentioned trauma-informed, and sometimes institutions will say that we're trauma-informed, or this is a trauma-informed course. I think it should be the other way. People who are not trauma-informed, they should say, we're not trauma-informed. This is a not trauma-informed institution. There should be a sign outside Vancouver Hospital. This is a non-trauma informed institution. I think it's a very slow process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we turn to you, the audience, and ask you to raise your hands high so that I can identify people with questions. So I have a person here with a hat on. That would be first. And then there is a person in the middle toward 2/3 back with the hand up and a mask on. And that will be the next.
Thank you. Thank you, Maté, for sharing your knowledge, and congratulations. My question is, you started well with Einstein, which I consider as also was a person, a pacifist. And my interest is about militarism and gender equality in militarism. What do you think are the reasons why men and women join the army? What kind of mind and heart and mind unity is there in the soldier? And how did you avoid joining the army coming out of the period of Second World War? Thank you.
With all due respect, I'm not going to answer that question. It's a bit off topic for me tonight. It's the kind of, thank you for asking it. It's the kind of question I'm happy to engage in. But let me tell you about a related study that my friend, Professor Peter Pronsos, who I think is in the audience, sent me 2 days ago. It showed the effect of war on the DNA of children. So that there's something about war trauma that changes how the genes operate. Children exposed to war, and I think about that one. But your question, with full respect, I'm going to decline to answer.
We have a next question, and who, if somebody else would. Okay.
Hello. Oh, it is on. Sorry. Hi, Dr. Maté. Nice to meet you finally. My name is Lindsay Vine, and I'm a mind-body coach, and I actually teach a lot of your material. I myself was sick with chronic fatigue syndrome for almost 8 years. I was severely ill, and your book, When the Body Says No, was a huge piece of my recovery. So I thank you very much for that. I also wanted to let you know that I'm a mind-body coach now, and I'm teaching within the healthcare system here in BC through Dr. Rick Arsenault. I teach courses.
Who do you teach?
I teach the patients in the BC system
You teach
through
patients?
through Dr. Rick Arsenault. He's
Great.
the top chronic fatigue doctor in BC.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to be teaching through Dr. Hyams, who is the top pain doctor in BC as well. And a lot of what I teach is your material. So I want to say thank you very much. And I wanted to let you know that it is coming into the healthcare system.
It's happening. Okay.
It is happening very slowly, but BC is like the forefront of this. And I'm so happy to be part of that. My degree is from SFU in public health. So I'm very proud to be teaching your work. My question is, the myth of normal actually was the first time I heard about how there's the genetic change in the telomeres of
Yeah.
in the cells.
It's not a genetic change, but anyway, go on.
Sorry,
Yeah, let-
epigenetic change, I
Yeah, yeah,
suppose.
yeah.
Epigenetic change in our telomeres caused by trauma,
Yeah,
which then leads to chronic illness.
yeah.
And I'm wondering if a better way to get in with the med students is by using that biological approach. Obviously, you have so many outcome studies proving this, and it hasn't gone anywhere in terms of getting into the system. Do you think that biological approach might be easier to get into the system?
Well, look, that's exactly what I'm saying, is that there's all these biological studies that are not being utilized or even noticed by the medical system. It's not for lack of information. It's not for lack of studies. It's not for lack of physiological evidence. So if you telomeres, as this questioner mentioned, is a structure at the end of our chromosomes. It's like the aglet at the end of my shoelaces. It keeps the strands together. So telomeres keep the strands of DNA together. And we're born with about 10,000 units. And when we die, we have about 4,000 units. So they wear off and they unravel with age. As they unravel, we unravel. And it's been shown repeatedly that the more stress people experience, or the more racism they experience, or the more, or say the mothers of chronically ill children, the caregivers of the designated caregivers of Alzheimer's patients, they have shorter telomeres than their chronological age. So their biological age is older than their chronological age. And this is true for Black people in the US, just because of racism. What more proof does anybody need? It's been published and published, and just that, by the way, you know what's really interesting? Is they looked at the telomere length of medical residents, and they shorten faster than other people their age. They're under tremendous stress, and that chronologically ages them. But what more research is required? So it's not that the biology doesn't exist. It's just that it's not considered. You're quite right, though. If you're trying to appeal to the medical mind, and if you have the opportunity to do so, bring in the biology. There's lots of it, lots of it.
Thank you. We have another question over here behind you.
Yeah.
Good evening. Dr. Maté, congrats on your award. I was introduced to your work because of my experience with the father of my granddaughter. This young man is still in the doorways on the east side. He struggles with addiction, and I needed to understand what was going on. I feel a little better informed, but at the same time, I'm very disheartened when I hear about these medical professionals that come to you as an aside and tell you that they see what you're experiencing. How does one, and this unfortunately happens in many fields, the frontline workers
Yeah.
are not consulted. So how does one get them on board, or the bureaucracy which is behind the scenes? Thank you.
Yeah. I understand what you're asking. Last week, I gave a talk here in Vancouver to 1,700 frontline workers in the housing field and in the public housing field, social housing, and they work with the most vulnerable and traumatized populations, people mentally ill, people racialized, people traumatized as children, addicted, and so on. And I raised that very point. And I asked them, how many have you felt, or how many have you experienced that what you see and what you understand is not appreciated or seen or taken into account by your leaders, by the people at the top. And there was just this buzz of agreement sweeping through the room. I got some emails afterwards. And unfortunately, systems are designed not to change. And the people with the most vision, understanding, depth, and compassion are the least likely to make it to the top. That's how it works. Hate to give you bad news, but that's how it works. Because people at the top want short-term results, they want efficiency, financial restrictions, and criteria that are laid down from the top. So in this democratic society, so-called, there's nothing democratic about the institutions in which people work, including and especially in the public, no, not especially, but including in the public health field. I don't know how to answer your question. I wish I knew, but here's the deal. David Eby never calls me up for advice. Justin Trudeau never phones me for advice. None of these people do. Every once in a while, I get a politician surprisingly telling me, oh yeah, I get it. I just can't talk about it. So I don't know how to answer your question, except keep the faith. You just keep doing it, saying it, speaking it, and hope that at some point it's going to penetrate. But I don't have an easy answer to your question. I'm sorry.
I have a question at the very, very back.
But you know what? Let me just say one final thing. Sitting here in the audience, and I won't identify him, is a former patient of mine from the downtown east side, whose life was at risk much of the time, with infections in his body that threatened his very survival, whose addictions were compelling and chronic, and it was like a prison. He's free now, and he's healthy now, and he's okay now. So you don't give up on anybody, including your relative, is it your son? You don't give up on anybody, okay?
So we have a question at the back, and then we have a question over here on the left following that. We're just getting the mic turned on. Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Maté. My name is Michael. My pronouns are he, him. I want to say that in a more positive attitude that I'm a delegate at the BC Federation of Labor Convention right now.
Yeah.
Last convention, I stood up and spoke at the mic about the medical model versus the social model.
Yeah.
Because with respect to that, in the past I was, I guess, diagnosed with mental illness and also addiction.
Mhm.
So right now I'm 27 years clean and sober,
Wow.
right? But I spent many years in the medical model system where there was, given medication and such, right? But it wasn't until I was given the ability to expand into the social model and take more CBT, DBT type treatments that I was able to use mindfulness and other techniques to reduce anxiety, depression, and things like that to come out of that, if you know what I mean, so that I could be able to come out of my other addictions and things that grew from that. So I'm just saying that I do have connections with some politicians, and we're trying hard to try and build in the social model into the public health system. But right now, what our biggest problem is that the funding is only for the medical model, right? Like you're talking about, we can only get medication and psychiatry for our mental health illnesses.
Yeah.
But if we could get the social model treatment funded by the provincial government, that could help a lot of people. So we're working hard to try to get that done.
Okay,
But it's gonna take some time.
is there a question here?
Yes, the question is, would you be able to help us with that situation?
Yeah, just call me in my spare time. I got lots. Listen, thank you for that statement. And if anybody in any position of authority or engaged in the work wants to contact me, I'm really happy to be contacted. I'd love to contribute to that kind of work. And I'm encouraged to hear that you're working on it and that you might have some political allies willing to support you. By all means, just reach out. Yeah, thank you.
We have a question here on the left.
Thanks very much, Dr. Maté. You mentioned earlier that the question you wanted to hear from doctors who were assembled before you was, is this true? Not
Yeah.
if this is true, what do we do?
Yeah.
But I would really appreciate it if you could speak a little bit to the why is this true? Do you feel that this is coming, that this sort of deep commitment to duality, this refusal to accept the kind of things that you're talking about?
Why is it that people have trouble accepting it? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, and do you
Yeah.
see it only as sort of a systemic rigidity, or do you see it as the result of a kind of unwillingness to accept the political implications of what you're saying?
Yeah.
And I just would appreciate if you could speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a lot of reasons. First of all, there's the Western mind, which is dualistic almost from the very beginning. 2,400 years ago, and I've said this often, but Plato, the Athenian philosopher, quoted Socrates, his teacher, as saying that the problem with the doctors of today is that they separate the mind from the body. So this dualism is one of the blights on Western thinking. And it's only been reinforced since the onset of capitalism and technology and industry. And that famous statement by Descartes about I think, therefore I am, so that there's no unity there. So that's kind of ingrained in the Western mind, as compared with Eastern and indigenous ways of understanding, which is far more about unity and oneness. Now that you have to, of course, give the Western mind its due. It's responsible for incredible achievements, insight, technological innovations, medical progress, unimaginable. So we're not dismissing it or denigrating it, but it is dualistic. So one thing is the ingrained habits of the Western mind, and the making the left intellectual brain the master of the whole gestalt, holistic, right-sided brain. In other words, making the masculine dominant over the feminine. So that's another source. Then, because of the incredible achievements of Western medicine, we've become the victims of our own success. We think that we know everything, or what we don't know is not worth knowing. So we don't look in other directions. Then there's a very arrogant colonial mindset, because basically Western capitalism establishes dominance by destroying native cultures. So which had to be made to seem inferior. So the Western mind is colonized by its own arrogance. And when I go to indigenous communities in this country, they have so much wisdom when it comes to healing. So much. But we don't look at that. There's that. Then there's the more practical considerations that institutions have a lot of inertia. If you've been practicing medicine for 20 years in this dualistic way, it's very hard to let go of that identity and just admit, there's a lot I don't know. You just carry on with what you know and what you're expert at. And then there is the training of medical doctors. As somebody once said, how do you build a cult where you separate people from their families, you sleep deprive them, you give them a uniform, a jargon only they can understand, and put them under authority and leaders. That's how you build a cult. In other words, you send them to medical school, which is a highly traumatizing experience for a lot of people. And doctors talk about this, some of them, very openly. And finally, probably not exhaustively, but finally, there's the influence of the pharmaceutical companies who funds research, those that will profit from it. That's what's presented in a lot of the medical journals. There's no profit to be made in talking to people about their traumas and their stress. But there's a profit to be made by making a pill that'll mitigate the effects of the trauma and the stress. A lot of profit. So the biological psychiatry and the biological approaches, there's a built-in bias in the whole research industry, purely related to profit. So there's all that, and maybe more.
We have time for one more question, and I shall go to this side of the room, at the very back, wearing a hat. I'm sorry, we have limited time, and we knew we would not get through all the questions. Please do join the book signing. Please do come to the event afterwards, the reception, and we appreciate your patience and for forbearance for not being able to ask the questions that you wish to have. So one last question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Maté. And I'm very, very, very glad to be here. And I'm a big fan of you. I'm a therapist. And so I do agree with a lot of things that you're saying, like almost everything you're saying. But there's one thing I think I got a concern is that when I see my clients who living in the world that becoming increasingly chaos, like for example, like Donald Trump got reelected and they got super stressed and over all this. And when you say you want a more controversy that can be talked, but my question, it will be even for me or for my clients, a lot of times, how we can live in this controversy without losing our shit. Yeah.
You know what? Can you repeat the question, please?
Just wondering how we can live through this controversy without losing our shit. Sorry, excuse the language. Did I get that right?
Well, I would like to understand your question more. You mean, how do you live through difficult times without getting triggered and emotionally upset and collapsing sometimes? Is that what you're asking?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Well, you think I know the answer? I don't always negotiate that channel very well. Sometimes I lose it. Less than I used to. I think that takes a lot of work. I think it takes, if you're a therapist, and I think I heard you say that you're a therapist.
Correct.
The most important work you'll ever do is on yourself. And it's ongoing work. And for me, it's ongoing work. Literally, it means taking care of all aspects of my life in all its various dimensions. And you know what? I called up a therapist 2 weeks ago, precisely because, and not for the first time this year, precisely because of the issue that you raised. I was kind of losing it, and I needed some guidance, some mirroring, some being heard. And I found it very helpful. And I have another appointment for this weekend, online. So, but there's other things in terms of self-regulation, taking care of body and soul, relationship, and so on. Not taking on too much, saying no when it's too much, and when necessary, you just reach out for help and don't expect perfection of yourself, because I hate to tell you, you'll never get it. And give yourself credit for the work you do, and allow yourself the grace and the compassion that you're a human being, and sometimes you'll lose it. And you'll come back, and you get help, and you'll deal with it. But it's never going to be perfect. So thanks.
So thank you. That concludes the formal event this evening, and we definitely want to extend a warm thank you to Dr. Maté. I also want to thank the online and in-person audience for joining us tonight, and the staff and volunteers who have made this event possible. And believe me, they have worked very hard behind the scenes to do this. The work of the Sterling Prize Committee and the team that supports them is a year-round endeavor. And I'm on the right one. So it's a year-round endeavor. And to that end, we're taking this opportunity tonight to launch the call for the nominations for the next Sterling Prize. Information about eligibility and nominations can be found on SFU's Provost and VP Academic website under Awards, Nora and Ted Sterling Prize. And you can access the site via the QR code on the screen behind me. It is an absolute pleasure and privilege to do this, so thank you very much. Ushers are going to point you to the way, so look out for ushers and they will make themselves highly visible. Thank you so much and enjoy.